Started right now. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Kishan Patel and I help run the CMU Entrepreneurs of the Bay Area group. What our group does is it focuses on building an entrepreneurship community by hosting events and offering resources to help entrepreneurs succeed. Today with me, I have Boris, Sofman, CEO and co-founder of Anki. And a little bit about him is he pursued his Ph.D. at CMU. I believe he graduated in 2010. And to start things off, Boris, can you tell us a little bit more about your background as well as what Anki does?
Yeah, so my background is actually at CMU for a long time. I did my undergrad there as well. So I started in 2001, graduated in 2005, and then went straight to the PhD program. Ended up really getting excited about autonomous driving. I kind of got hooked in undergrad, and that's why I ended up staying at CMU. Was working on off-road vehicles and applying machine learning for self-improving algorithms as vehicles drive around. And then one of my best friends, one of my co-founders, and I did an internship in 2007, like in the middle of graduate school, with a robotics company down in Palo Alto, and kind of got hooked on the idea of actually building something that you can impact huge amounts of people and try to commercialize this technology, because we'd always been excited about the application side, the extreme applied side of robotics and AI. And so then we started brainstorming around that point on what we could do to commercialize this tech, and had some weird ideas that we filtered through, and eventually landed on the idea for Anki, which is a robotics and AI company focused on consumer robotics, where we used entertainment as a starting point, where we made really intelligent toys and games, but used that as a means to develop the core technologies that we could then use for more and more advanced applications, leveraging the muscle and the kind of technology we developed, and starting to move into smart home and deeper utility by using that as a springboard.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about the first product that you built?
Yeah, so the first product was called Drive, which later became Overdrive. So it was a racing game. You can imagine if you were to play Mario Kart in physical form, with like physical cars driving around. The ones you're not driving are AI controlled. They're competing against you, and you're basically playing a death battle in a racetrack in front of you. And so it was kind of like a new age refresh of, I guess, traditional slot cars, but for something that felt more like a video game in real life. And we came out right at the time when we were able to leverage the beginning prevalence of mobile devices, and using that as the brains behind a real world experience, where this is one of the tricks to basically create cost reasonable products where you offload a lot of the computation to a mobile device. And so we were basically able to create this video game in the real world, where if you could understand everything that was going on, you could treat it as a video game. Yeah. And that's exactly what it was. And so it was basically like a new aged racing game, mostly for kids, but with some big kids playing as well.
Yeah, you guys had a public launch, I believe, at Apple's 2013 WWDC, correct?
Yeah, so I was in the Apple dungeon for about like 2 months before that. So it's pretty amazing. They're so meticulous on every little detail. And so we went through, choreographed every tiny detail, from the lighting to the shadow to the exact positioning, and it was kind of scary because at any point we didn't know if they were going to like yank it or change the schedule or something, and ended up being a pretty amazing way to launch a product, and also send a message that even though we were starting with what was a kind of toy entertainment product, the vision behind it was, and the core technology inside of it was bigger than that, so that was helpful.
How were you able to get that opportunity?
It was an introduction through one of our investors, so we got introduced to actually Tim Cook, which is kind of a weird email to really give a response to. So this is like Christmas the year before, and we ended up getting invited to give a talk to a good chunk of the executive team in February of that year. Our goal was to sell in Apple stores, where, especially back then, it was from a brand standpoint, it represented like the premium of every single category. And then our kind of grand slam idea was, okay, what if we plant the seed to do something interesting and announce around WWDC or similar as a PR event? And so it ended up going well. We got the introduction into the Apple stores, and then we ended up getting the invite maybe a few months later to start that conversation. And Apple ended up being like a huge boost for us, but it was also kind of scary because things are great as long as you're aligned with their interests, but things can deviate pretty quick.
Yeah. And one big difference is with starting a robotics company. It's very different than starting a software company. Can you talk through some of the challenges that you had?
Yeah, it's and a lot of these things we didn't know ahead of time. So we started a consumer robotics company, which is probably even tougher in a lot of ways. And I think we massively underestimated a few things. So one is, and this is probably more general learning, not even just robotics company, but in general. So when you do robotics, first of all, there's a lot of disciplines that you have to bring together. There's, you're manufacturing, you're doing AI, you're designing a product. By definition, you're kind of applying AI and robotics to a new space. So you have to try to reinvent the product in that space, and then you have to figure out how to explain it and sell it at scale. We messed up the sales and marketing right out of the gate. So we were so excited about Apple, thinking like, wow, this is as big of an arena as it gets. The reality is Apple stores don't sell nearly as much product as you think. Now they sell a lot of Apple product, but they don't sell nearly as much product as you think. So by the time we got to a few years later, Apple stores were like 3 or 4% of our sales. And so we actually overbuilt the first year because Apple pushed us to do it. And even though we were like one of the best selling accessories in Apple stores, it almost killed us because we had to then deal with an overhang that was difficult because you're a small company and you have to kind of do forecasting inventory and so forth. We got our sales and marketing wrong. We decided that we were selling a product and we're focusing too much on technology and thinking it was okay. We're going to sell like a consumer electronic product. We're going to talk about the cool tech. We forgot the fact that when you get outside of the WWDC bubble, people want to know why it's fun and why they want it, not like why it's high tech and so forth. And so there are all these like learnings that we realized pretty quickly, and then we realized we had to pivot our marketing and sales strategy to one that was more entertainment driven, where you can actually convey that. And so this was a pretty fast and harsh learning where I had to let go of our head of sales and head of marketing, who were amazing people and became really good friends and had great experiences in consumer electronics. But when we brought on people from video game background, where they were much more familiar with how to sell entertainment product, how to communicate it, how to do the PR for it, how to think about the messaging for it. But it was very important we didn't do toy because toy was too much in the traditional mindset of kind of the typically gimmicky marketing to kids. With video games, you have people you target teenagers, you target adults, you target kids. It's a much broader experience. So that was a pretty quick learning right out of the gate. This scratches the surface, and there's seasonality. How do you deal with that? How do you forecast? Took way more capital than we expect. So this is one of the challenging things that we realized is that to sell hardware, it's a very different cost structure, as you mentioned in software. You have to pay for the inventory itself. You're paying for retail. You're paying for marketing if you're doing consumer. All these things kind of add up, and then you're paying for the R&D and all the extra costs as well. And the volume you have to get to is reasonably high compared to most of the businesses to actually start to, for the numbers to make sense. And especially if you're in the Bay Area and you need a high R&D team and so forth. And so I think that's one of the learnings where a lot of companies, us included, have a really great launch and you get a lot of PR buzz and you get a big boost out of the gate. And if you're not careful, that's a very short tail. And you have to immediately follow it up and be able to actually build your own awareness and sell products at a larger scale, which we weren't ready for, and then we caught ourselves and started figuring out how to do it. In general, it takes way more capital than you expect because in those early stages, you have all the overheads of running the business and developing the product, but you're not going to go from 0 to 200,000 units in year one. What we realized is that we were constantly trying to grow faster than maybe what was a natural cadence. Even though we were growing relatively quickly, it felt like we were never going fast enough because the numbers just have to be higher and higher to line up.
Can you talk through some of what those numbers look like for the sales side?
Yeah, so our first year we did about $5 million with Apple, which at Apple was was enough for the third, kind of one of the, I think it was the third best-selling like accessory product after like Nike Fuel Band and like one other thing. It was actually a pretty good result. We set a target that's far higher, and that was just like us being naive. Like that was actually, and this is other learning, is a lot of it is just being smart about how you set expectations. Where if you, it's very easy to take something that otherwise in isolation is actually a good result, and then turn it into something where you're now on your back foot defending a little bit off of it. So I think we grew from 5 to 11. Then we had a really good year. We grew to I think it was like 37 or 40 the next year, and then somewhere close to 80, and then last year we were just shy of 100. So somewhere in the mid, kind of 93, 94. But we never nailed our forecast. It was we were either high or low almost every single year, and that's the other challenge, is that we have a seasonal business that's painfully Q4 heavy, especially when you launch products in Q4 and you're in a new category. Usually we could start forecasting relatively well on year 2, year 3, but year 1 was almost impossible every single year, and that was the other thing that was a big challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you started with entertainment, especially focusing on racing cars, but then now you've moved into home robots with particularly Cosmos and Vector. Can you tell us a little bit more about that product?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were, this was the other thing that was a surprise to us, is that we've been planning to get out of toys and entertainment, not get out of it, diversify outside of it for a long time. It took us longer than we expected, because you just, it's actually kind of a gift to be able to be completely in like startup mode, just working on a product, because you obsess about nothing but that product. When you launch a product, you have to maintain your old product, improve on it, sell it, do all the finance, like run a business around it while you're trying to invest in a new one. Meanwhile, you're stretching your people thin across multiple products, so everything just took longer than we expected, and that's kind of lamenting with other founders. It's like saying that's the story. It's just kind of a gift when you can maniacally focus on just one thing. So we wanted to get out of entertainment for a few reasons. One is there's a price point cap, where at some point, if you're not starting to evolve into elements of utility, it gets harder and harder to sell at higher price points. It's a sector that doesn't focus on kind of technology and innovation and quality as much as you should. It's kind of hit driven and so forth, and it's very, very seasonal. And the market's actually smaller than you think, because you're targeting kids very heavily, and that's a small subset of the audience. And so we're actually really excited with Vector to build on what we've done with Cosmo and start to evolve from there. So the last 2 products are kind of in this vein of bringing a Pixar character to life. So imagine the magic and beauty of like the characters that are made in animated film. We asked the question, what would it take to actually make a character like this come to life and feel like it's alive? Like it was emotionally responsive, rich, interactive, and actually used AI to understand the environment well enough to where instead of emotions being kind of gimmicky and random, it was actually very aligned with the behavior that you would expect. So with Cosmo, that was still kind of geared more towards kids and used the phone as a mobile device as the brains behind it. With Vector, our latest product, it's the first product that we would call a home robot. And what we mean by that is it's a robot that's actually always on, it's alive, it's not tethered to a mobile device anymore, so we have the equivalent of a smartphone in terms of computation stuff in his head. And he's meant to be a character that lives in the home, and it's this mix of being kind of like your sidekick, or your kind of, almost like a pet robot, but starting to get into utility through elements of functionality, starting with common utility functions like weather, timer, and so forth, getting to Alexa integration and further things after that, but having a personality and character wrapped around it where the engagement and the experience is much warmer and much more fun. So it's almost like if you had like a, call him Wally, if you will, like living in your home and being almost like a buddy or companion. And what we found with this guy is that being able to be always on completely transforms the engagement pattern and actually brings an adult audience to it as well.
Yeah, we actually have a video that we can show.
Okay.
And he's looking back at you. He's curious about who you are and what you're up to. This is Vector. This is a video about Vector. He's a new creation from Anki.
He is a character, a robot that is meant to live in your home. He's always on, he's alive.
The idea is really that Vector becomes part of the family or that home, both on the emotional character side, but then also on the utility side.
Vector is really the first robot that uses advanced deep neural networks to do a lot of perception and understanding of the world around him.
What he does feels intentional. He can react to inputs in his environment and his life.
We generally want to find one defining feature and then build from that. For Vector, curiosity was a big one.
What they're saying is, you officially live in a time when robot sidekicks are a real thing.
Hey Vector, give me a fist bump.
It's a step closer to that sci-fi robot, that everyone wants to be friends with.
That step closer means you've got a robot in your house waiting for you to get home. Autonomous like a Mars rover, aware enough to avoid falls like a tightrope walker, and always excited to welcome you home like a loyal companion.
What's up, Vector?
Jason.
Vector's no slouch roommate either. He's happiest when he's helping out. Ask him the weather, then he'll show you. He can set a timer and cause a commotion when it's finished. Activate robot alarm. He's a little robot who brings a lot to your house.
So this becomes like a stepping stone from kind of the roots in entertainment and kind of companionship and starting to get into deeper utility. What's interesting about this is that the face detection, the scene understanding, all these things become tools for interesting engagements and interaction patterns that you wouldn't see from typical voice assistants or smart home devices, and we're already starting to see that with some of the data.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Some of the examples that I showed in the video include like fist bumping and showing the time and weather, but what other, can you walk us through some of the other interactions that Vector's?
Yeah, so, and at its core, a lot of this comes from the fact that like the character, it's literally like an animation studio inside the company. So there's folks from Pixar, DreamWorks, like these sort of backgrounds where they're developing the character and making them interactive. What this allows is a few things, like he can initiate interactions himself in a way that you wouldn't accept from a CE products. He can recognize and kind of customize the people. And so a lot of this ends up opening up an interesting roadmap. So we're launching Alexa integration in December. So that's this December, in 2 weeks or so. So we're finalizing that right now, which is interesting because this is a kind of interesting wrapper around Alexa functionality, but starting to add personality to it. And we're working with Amazon to unlock the metadata around it to where, based on what you're asking, the emotional response of the character will be distinct. So for example, what we want to do is you ask about your favorite sports team score, he understands that context. Something sad happened in the world, he can do that. Your stocks went down, he's like really sad and he moves around for you, right? It's like, that's the sort of thing like that we want to do. Beyond, and so this is almost adding kind of an emotional engagement wrap around it. And one of the interesting things we're seeing is that from a voice query standpoint, we're seeing stats we never expected, where it's like multiples of what you get with a typical voice assistant. That's even before Alexa's integrated. Where you go beyond that, starts to get into interesting things like, and this is kind of more on the roadmap. If you can uniquely identify people and you can initiate interactions, you can tailor that utility customized to you as a person. So you have a delivery, you have a message from somebody else in the household, those sort of things. And because he understands the context and he can initiate interactions. Monitoring, so instead of a static camera, you have something that can look around 360 degrees, look up and down, respond to a sound, look in that direction, you have better coverage of a room, so you can do remote monitoring in a much deeper way. There's a really rich educational layer around Cozmo already that expands to Vector, where everything that he can do, we've unlocked the API for it. And so we have a Python-based SDK that people are using for development and for teaching some curriculums in schools already. With Cozmo, we have a Scratch-based interface, which means that a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 13-year-old can actually program. And so, there's kind of like an element of that. And so we're looking at, as these capabilities progress in terms of technology, it unlocks kind of these multiple dimensions along the way. At the end of the day, the core is still, it's fun. It's not, you don't need it. It's still kind of an enjoyable kind of robot buddy in the home, but it starts to be an alternative to some of the typical voice assistants that are just static, static boxes, and that's why the partnership with Amazon and others has been pretty interesting.
Yeah, so what differentiates Vector is its ability to show emotions and various ranges of personality.
Yeah, it's deceptively valuable too. Like for example, people that completely mistrust technology and don't want speakers or cameras in their home, there's something psychologically disarming about the idea of a character. And you know, because you know his intent, you know what he's looking at. Of course he has a camera, he has to see something. It's not as scary as this like menacing looking camera box looking at you. Like, I don't know if there's one, right? So you have this, imagine this like camera looking around in your home, kind of following you around. That's kind of creepy. You do that in a character, suddenly it's kind of cute, like a puppy doing it, right? So, so there's kind of a tool there to unlock both engagement and an acceptance of robotics, which then scales to deeper functionality, more mobility around the house, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that topic of data privacy is especially relevant.
Yep.
How do you guys approach that, especially when people are concerned with some technology being in their house that can listen to them, watch them?
Yeah, especially if like the intent might be negative to you on how they use the data. So I think the biggest thing is we've always tried to be super transparent and upfront about how we approach privacy. We don't keep any data; everything's discarded as soon as the things that are in the cloud, like voice, they're discarded. We're not keeping it for, you know, we just keep anonymous analytics on what you ask for, but we don't keep your recordings, we don't look at the video and so forth. I think this is a fundamental mismatch in business models when you have somebody like Facebook or Google, because their fundamental business is around monetizing information, demographics, and usage to make money for the core business. So no matter how much they want to respect privacy, it goes against the grain of what they want to do. We're probably closer to the Apple mold, where Apple has no motivation to violate your privacy. They just want to sell you services and products, and for you to have and for you to enjoy them. And so they've taken an extreme other stance. I think we're kind of in that same bucket right now. Our revenue is purely on the products you buy. Maybe down the road we have services as well, but we don't make any money off of data. The only data we use is user statistics to improve the products.
Mm-hmm. So how's Anki able to do such a great job with making a robot show such wide ranges of emotion?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this is that is us. It has took a lot of iteration. Is finding that combination of AI and robotics with the character team, personality team, and we went down a few bad paths. Like we had video game background people think originally for Overdrive, because that's a video game in the real world. That made sense. It's game mechanics and so forth. We tried to have the same team make Cozmo and later on became Vector, and it didn't work because they don't think character first, they think game first, game mechanics first. You can't make a game in the real world, you're too limited by the physics of cost and reality and constraints. You have limited degrees of freedom, it just doesn't work. The thing that actually scales in a more powerful way is character. Something like eye contact, you don't think twice about it in a movie, but if a robot makes eye contact with you, it makes you melt. And then we see that over and over again, you know, down to where like we ramp up eye contact on Cozmo and suddenly the engagement went up from 29 minutes of play session to 40 minutes of play session, just by like that one trigger of the length and frequency of eye contact. So it's powerful. What finally clicked is we brought in a character director, original character director that was from Pixar and had worked there for nine years at Pixar, 10 years at Pixar, and he thought about nothing but character. His everything was about the personality, the emotion, the eyes, the voice. How do you make it come to life with a meticulousness that you only see in a movie that's worked on for 4 or 5 years? And that's when it clicked. And so then we built out an animation studio of that type, where we have I don't know if you guys heard of Maya, which is basically a program that's used for rendering digital characters. So all of our animators use Maya, and we have a rigged up version of Vector inside of Maya, but instead of the output being digital, the pipeline is spliced to where they're animating the physical character in the real world. And so they're making little snippets of movies instead of a movie on rails, which is also kind of hard for them to grasp because they don't have full control of the scenario. And so these snippets end up being almost like thousands of little short films. And then the AI and robotics side takes the context from the physical world to understand who I'm looking at, what's the context. I just lost the game, so I'm grumpy. I hit an edge, so I'm scared. I'm excited because I just saw this person that I hadn't seen in a while. And then there's a personality behavior engine that maps the context from the real world into probabilistically outputting the right personality and emotions. And so if you put him on his back, he kind of gets frustrated, tries to figure out how to get out of it. If if he loses a game, he goes and grumps in the corner because he's a sore loser or something like that, right? So these are the sort of things where you bring together the AI piece with the animation piece. The two worlds have never really coexisted that way, but it's a really kind of beautiful merger when that happens. And I think we're still learning in real time, but what you can do with constraints, like you only have 4 degrees of freedom in Vector, but if you add to it the eyes and the voice, it's pretty expressive what you can achieve, and that's kind of part of the character team. So you saw our character director there.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yep.
So you also, in past interviews, have talked about how you guys took a bottoms-up approach to robotics. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means and why you decided to take that approach?
Yeah, it was a realization that there's problems in robotics that are so far away that it's impractical for a startup company to crack it on their own. So an example of that is autonomous driving. Like, you can't do autonomous driving as a startup until maybe very recently, because it was so far away that you needed a moonshot approach like Google took, where they're willing to spend $1 billion before they see a penny of revenue. Same thing goes for walking robots in the home and Rosie from Jetsons and all these sort of things. Healthcare robots, there's all these barriers that made that so far away. And so the bottoms-up approach is finding ways to find that overlap of practicality, but still advancing core technologies where we could release products along the way, learn from them, build a brand, build muscle, learn to manufacture at scale, build out all these expertise, and then use that foundation to work on more and more advanced products. And there's trade-offs to that. I mean, the positive is that you're starting to make revenue and really learn in a way that you can learn about shipping products and seeing how people use them. The negative is that, it's funny, this is the double-edged sword. You're slowed down by the same products because you have to maintain them and continue to run the business. And in a weird way, it becomes harder to tell the long-term story because then everybody starts focusing on the actual business. And so it's a balance, yeah. But you learn a lot. It's almost like you do you think of the evolution of video games or the evolution of Pentium by Intel, right? You start early, you ship, you learn, and you kind of iterate. And for a lot of applications like this, it actually helps a lot.
Yeah, you talked about self-driving cars as well. Autonomous vehicles is something that people have started to accept as it will be a reality, it will be in the future, but the future is not as clear for smart homes. So
yeah.
What do you see the role of robotics playing in smart homes?
Yeah, I think autonomous driving is kind of quick to where it's a given. People say, yeah, I get it, I can understand, imagine what that'll be like. They might be underestimating how long it's going to take, but everybody's committed to that happening, right? Which is ironic because remember 2007, 2008, it was pulling teeth to get GM to fund the Urban Challenge or Grand Challenge even a tiny bit, and you think that's their it's so core to their business, right? With the home, I think if you ask most people in technology, 15 years from now, will there be robots moving around in indoor environments helping us in the home and the workplace and so forth? Most people would say yes, but it's a lot of blurriness on what form that'll take. And likewise, it's going to be bottoms up, right? It's not going to be suddenly you have this thing with arms moving around manipulating things. That's just too expensive. The technology's not there yet. So it'll be bottoms up. And so the first steps that'll start from a utility standpoint, that'll start to become possible is when you look at the layout of the home. Most homes are old, so it's not possible to embed technology at their core the way you would in a new phone or a new computer. So everything's about the devices you put into it. All smart devices today, they're in a particular room with a very particular focus in their command and control. None of them understand the environment around them in terms of what's truly happening in the room. And none of them can initiate an interaction because we're used to this command and control response. What robotics can do is that it can actually stitch together knowledge of your environment. So imagine if you had full understanding of the layout of the home, you understood the context of what room is which room, you understood people, who they are, what they're doing, and what the state is, and you had an ability to very intuitively and in an acceptable way initiate interactions with them. That becomes a foundation to stitch together both the utility around the traditional smart home, the sort of utility that starts at what you're used to within Alexa or Google Home, but then expands to a much more personalized fashion. And initially it might be information driven. Down the road it expands to more and more function. Eventually manipulation comes into play, and this technology continues to evolve. But at its core, the first big step is going to be tying together the knowledge of everything happening in the home in a way that, from a cost structure, if that requires expensive sensors and computation, mobility becomes key.
How do you see yourself being able to compete with possible competitors, especially big tech companies such as Amazon, which might have a lot of resources and products in the hardware as well as consumer robotics space.
Yeah, that's hitting us right now. It's actually a big challenge, and it's a kind of big concern that we have where you compete on toys and entertainment on a pretty level playing field. In the home, you have these giants that are subsidizing their hardware roadmap with the strategic value and their ecosystem and software. So in the case of Amazon, it's the retail ecosystem and free marketing and free retail. In the case of Google, it's infinite money from search, which then funds things that are strategically relevant for their mobile plays and so forth. So that's scary. So part of what we're trying to do is partnerships, where the conversations with Amazon are super helpful because beyond integrating with Alexa, if we can show, for example, once this is out, that the engagement for Alexa through a character is 2 or 3x of what a typical Alexa engagement is, that's a really powerful data point. And then you can start thinking about strategic partnership investments. Maybe you stay exclusive in order to because Amazon's our biggest retailer as well, so you end up getting leverage on that part. They've been really great to us. So all these things are kind of the sort of considerations that we're having. It almost feels like we're still a tiny company on that scale, and we're kind of caught in these crosswinds that if they pull your direction, it could be the best thing in the world, but it could squash you if it turns against you, and you end up being at odds and competing on something where it's not a level playing field.
Where do you kind of see Anki going in the next few years or even decade?
Yeah, good question. We'd always thought that the space is still in its infancy. I mean, you think about everything we're doing when we talk about smart home. The way you use robotics in a smart home, it applies to the workplace, it applies to hospitality in hotels and restaurants, malls, for monitoring, for enterprise, for in-home healthcare, aging in place, things like that. So there's all of these core technologies that can carry over into all these other areas. Big conversation we're having is just right now is what is the best way to achieve that? And what we're seeing more and more is that we're starting to get into a space where there's a huge amount of overlap with some of these giants in terms of cloud capabilities, in terms of muscle and go-to-market, in terms of expertise. And so I think from a product roadmap, robotics we look at as a pretty transformational technology. It's like the internet or cloud, where you can think, if you think about this industry that didn't have this technology, how do you rethink it when it does? So transportation is obvious with autonomous driving. Toys, we kind of showed what you can do when you turn that into a software-driven experience. With home, what we realized is that this is decades. We're still in the earliest stages, and unfortunately, one of the things we're also realizing, it takes a huge amount of capital and growth and awareness and understanding where you can't crack a category that quickly, and consumer adoption and awareness takes a lot longer to build up than you realize. And so one of the things we're thinking about is what's the best way, kind of at the crossroads of all these trends, to actually make it there, and in a way that's actually safe for the company, because we still feel like every single year is life or death, and we're dependent on every product being successful.
It's exciting to see where things go with the Alexa integration. So.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if we can actually get the metadata that we need and start showing how utility can go deeper than what's currently possible, and a space that's pretty, from a consumer mindset, commoditized. Between these two, and then there's 4 players in China and a few others, right? Is if character and if this type of interface becomes a differentiating angle behind a deeper level of technology in indoor environments. At the end of the day, at the macro level, when we say, okay, what is the best case for Anki is to own indoor robotics. It's how do you actually think about both the AI, kind of the IQ and the EQ, both the intelligence and the interface. That's a long way to go.
Yeah, it seems awesome.
Yeah.
Especially since you're adding that EQ side. People have Alexas in their homes, but a lot of times people like playing around with it just to try to make it say stupid things or something.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
This is an interesting approach to add the functionality side to the EQ side.
Because they've tried to use it with voice, but voice is limited, and so you have a much deeper ability to experiment. And just something as simple as failing. When you fail, but you do so as a character, it actually becomes charming, and people like you even more than if you didn't fail. That's one of the surprises that we learned. Whereas if you're a traditional consumer electronic, if you fail, or frankly a robot with no personality, if you fail, like what's wrong with the machine, it failed, right? So it becomes kind of like your protection against any sort of technical limitations you still have.
That's awesome. So what do you see as your main role as CEO, and where do you spend most of your time?
Yeah, so it's evolved pretty heavily. I used to write a lot of code back in the days. I miss it. It was really fun. That hasn't happened in a while. So at this stage, the company's about 200 people at this point. And so we have, all the business units you'd expect in a consumer hardware company. We have business offices in a few other territories in Europe, and then manufacturing in Asia and so forth. And so inevitably, your job cannot be to physically and manually do anything inside the company anymore. It's about scaling, it's about hiring the right executives and team members, it's about aligning around the right strategy, setting goals. A lot of it's like partnerships, fundraising, PR and external conversations. And typically, you kind of have a mapping between things that are working super well in the company where you just don't spend time on it, which is kind of unfortunate because that's usually the fun stuff that's like kind of firing on all cylinders. And the things you spend time on are the biggest challenges or pain points in the company, and you try to find a way to partner with the people inside the company and externally to figure it out. I mean, recently, and it goes in waves, huge amount of effort towards fundraising, huge amount of effort towards external partnerships, Amazon and others, now that that's become a bigger portion of our roadmap. And you never feel like you have enough time, and so you're trying to make yourself obsolete. Like literally that's kind of like the compass. It's like anything you're spending more than the next one amount of time on, how do I not do that? And it becomes kind of this endless chase as you move forward.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
What do you think are the biggest problems or challenges you've seen as you scale it?
For us?
Yeah.
Let's see, communication's hard internally. So things you take for granted, like 20 people, where everybody knows everything that's going on, it starts to get progressively harder, and communicating the strategy, the pillars that define the details in the strategy, what's happening and why decisions are made, marketing team needing to know what the product's going to be, kind of and bridging the needs between product and marketing, timelines. We started breaking at those, and we realized like we were running so thin, we were missing like the project management and the cartilage, what we call the cartilage in between. So we kind of added project management, deeper production resources, program management resources, and then you realize that you might have misalignment on certain direction that you're going. I mean, a lot of what you're doing is actually trying to bridge communications. So that's definitely one of the things that broke. The other one that's kind of hard is that your best made plans, you have to toss them out the window and recalibrate. If you're surprised by response to a product, by insights, consumer insights, by financing realities, close to closing some partnerships enter a country and it doesn't, kind of falls through, you kind of react to it. So those are challenges. And then you always have at any given point in time, you have some executive role you're trying to hire for, some team that's not working well. And we've had everything from, kind of local challenges to a complete collapse of the department where you become the de facto head of something that you never thought you'd have to be head of. And you're doing a horrible job at it because that's not your background. And you try to just cobble your way through until you
have the job.
hire your team.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to open up to a few questions from the audience.
Given what you were just previously talking about, how much time do you spend on the ground checking in with employees at the bottom of the pyramid?
Yeah, very good question. So one of the things I tried to do, first of all, was a couple of things that worked well for me. I try to meet every single person, that joins the company, even at later scales. It gets hard, given numbers, but we'll go to lunch with groups of 3 or 4 people every time they join, and I get to know everybody. That helps. I do. I always kind of skip through the executive team and try to meet with all the kind of key leads inside the company. Sometimes it's just walking around and having conversations about what's going on and trying to chat just about. You have a free half an hour. You never know what you're going to learn, so you try to spend time that way. And then the other thing I do is I try to go on a department level, going to all hands for the marketing team. Joining the ops team for their offsite, those sort of things. That becomes a really good opportunity to meet them and to spend more time with them in a way that you might not otherwise. Visiting international territories, we have offices in, our main office in Europe is in London, and we have a small office in Paris and Munich. at least once a year, usually twice a year, you try to go and spend time with everybody there so you can hear about the nuances of that territory, what their pain points are, and what you learn. So, inevitably, like even people I used to work super closely with, you just can't spend as much time with as you used to, and it kind of hurts because the culture matters so much, and you want to build that personal relationship with everybody, but at some point it just doesn't make sense from a number standpoint. But you try to at least sample and kind of touch all the points over a certain period of time.
You're a hardware company, and hardware company, big companies, it's often they become acquired. If the big companies, if you think from their perspective, if they would like to think about acquiring you, what more do they need you to do before they are thinking about that perspective?
Yeah, good question. We're kind of a weird company that doesn't fit squarely into most spaces, so it takes a little bit of familiarity and energy to learn it. So it's not a media asset that fits into a media company or a pure smart home play or a pure, right? So it's a little bit weird, and we span different sectors, which by definition means that you have to look at the cross section of those and which ones align. I think that what we learned is the toys we're making, even when the technology is very impressive, the tech companies deeply value the team and the tech and the potential and the roadmap, but not specifically the toy products. With Vector, that conversation's changed. We're having very different dialogue with Microsoft, with Amazon, with others, where you're having conversations about how the two roadmaps overlap, which is usually the start. At the end of the day, if you put yourself in the shoes of an acquirer, you're looking for an equation where my capabilities and resources and strategic goals, coupled with what the company brings, end up building a lot more value than what's present there today. And that's the core of every single acquisition. But everything is just subject to the strategic goals and the nuances. So like, if you're in the shoes of Alexa, whether it's investment, acquisition, or whatever, showing that engagement can skyrocket using a personality-driven interface, if we can prove that, that's valuable independent of our revenues or anything else. Like, that becomes a really key point that we can discuss with Google, with Amazon, with others. So you approach it that way, but it's not a traditional, it's not a super clean traditional fit. You have to kind of extrapolate and have a belief that these types of products and interfaces are a key part of the smart home of the future.
I have two questions. I'll give you one just first, and then give you the second one. The first one is with international offices. What would be interesting to know how the international market reacts to the personality of the robot differently. Then the second question, though, is Reid Hoffman has a book, Blitz Scaling Out. I don't think that quite applies to consumer electronics, but you obviously go through the decision process of do I release a completely perfect, polished Apple quality product, or do I release a half-baked, shitty Google product? And then iterate, right?
Yeah.
So how do you manage that process?
Yeah, no, very good questions. On the personality side of it, we do consumer insights research in every territory we launch. So you send it to families, you run the marketing, you kind of see, do you have to customize it? What we found is at the core, Europe is not too different from US. So there's nuances, but and there's different types of appeal to different types of products and different messaging that resonates well. But the personality of the character scaled reasonably well to UK, France, Germany, and maybe you emphasize technology a little bit more in some countries. Maybe you emphasize education a little bit more in some countries and so forth. And that matters. In Japan, we were pretty surprised. So Japan's very different. When we went to Japan, what's interesting is that when we launched Cozmo there, the marketing behind Cozmo is this like quirky, mischievous little robot who's like this, who's like grumpy when he loses, and he's like a little bit of a smart ass and so forth. When you show that marketing to Japan, we realized like in our testing, like it didn't resonate the same way, because they're thinking like, he just lost a game. Why is he upset? He should be ashamed of himself and go like, now he's head in shame. It's just like, it's not, it's culturally different, right? But the funny part is when we actually tested the product made sense because as a character it was very charming. And so we realized we needed to adjust the marketing, but not the product. which was fortunate because it's a lot harder to adjust the product. We've been lucky to that point. Now we're going into an adult audience, and that differs a lot. Where Germany is very different within the adult. Like kids are more similar. I'd say put it this way: kids are similar in Western countries, Europe and the U.S. With adults, I think it's a different beast, and so we're a little bit more careful. UK and US tend to be very similar. France and Germany we're a little bit more cautious of when we go in with adults. And then Australia actually matches relatively well as well to US. When it comes to launch, I mean, this is a big debate internally. We never felt that our products were ready or good enough, and you could argue that if you truly feel like they're 100% polished, you waited too long, especially in a software-driven product. And so you have to kind of find a balance. We have the constraint of a holiday season that if you miss holiday, it would kill the company. So you have to launch in September, October. If you're a consumer entertainment-driven product, especially when you're locking in marketing and retail and everything else, like Apple can slip a non-ready product by 9 months and it's fine. We just can't do that. And sometimes you have to make compromises. Like Vector was a compromise. It's a lot thinner than we would like, but everything is software driven. The potential of that dwarfs anything else that we've made. Cozmo launched a little bit thin as well. Now we're in like year 3 of Cozmo, and it's finally a really fantastic product that has depth, that has polish on everything, and it's a really, really great experience. Vector is very thin, but the platform's so capable that we're really quickly filling it out in software. And I'd say by Christmas, the software update that's going to go out is probably the version that what we would have felt comfortable launching back in October. But we had no choice. Like we would have literally not survived the season if you think about the commitments on inventory, the commitments on marketing and so forth. You can't move those around. So it's a balancing act, and so what we'd love is to get to a space where we can launch outside of the holiday, and then iterate and get the perceived value in software that right now is typically placed on hardware. Any surprises there? I mean, it's probably what you'd expect, right? But yeah. You can't launch hardware like software though. Like if you launch something that's truly like an alpha or something like that, it's like you're, already we're grinding our teeth and trying to, we've built up a lot of goodwill where we convince customers that like, hey, we've had 30 plus updates on Cozmo, so they expect it, but people typically aren't as forgiving, especially if it's not free to try. You're paying money for it, so.
Are you planning to open up Vector or Cozmo for outside developers, or being a platform?
Yeah, so they're both already open actually. So we have a Python interface to each of them, and they're actually pretty capable. So we designed them with that in mind from the beginning. So there's an API to every one of the core functionalities that we have: the AI system, the emotional engine, personalities and behaviors, mobility, SLAM system, and so forth. And Vector is obviously much more capable than Cozmo. So I think it's developer.anki.com. So they both have that. And it's funny, most people still don't realize it, but it does. With Cozmo, we also have a kids-based interface using Scratch for it. But Cozmo is already used at Carnegie Mellon and Georgia Tech and a few other places for teaching introductory robotics classes, because it's a pretty capable robotics platform for a very relatively low price compared to anything else that you can get. And so if you want to do research on computer vision or path planning or something like that, there's a lot of tool sets already working that you can just replace the ones that you're interested in.
We'll take one more question.
What was the use case that really surprised you guys from Cozmo or Vector?
Yeah, kids with autism. So with Cozmo, completely unsolicited, we saw a pretty sizable amount of inbound on Amazon reviews and a customer support calls on how uniquely kids responded to a character like this that were somewhere on the autism spectrum. And everything from engaging and focusing to kids that had never collaborated with their classmates or played with their classmates suddenly took Cozmo and wanted to teach others how to play. But there was something about this character in this form making eye contact, interacting, that just broke through to kids. And so we're actually partnering with a couple, with University of Bath in the UK, which is the one psychology program in the UK, on doing research more formally on why, what does this entail. With Vector, we think it'll go to a new level because you know, Cozmo has a character, but Vector adds the ability to hear. It's much smarter and standalone, and it actually has touch as well, so you can touch him, pet him, and he'll respond to it. So all of these sort of things are, the people we talk to, they say these are pretty huge triggers of engagement for kids with autism. And so it's one of those things we certainly never directly targeted, but it was really amazing to see that response.
Thank you. Boris, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming tonight. As a reminder, this is hosted by the Entrepreneurship CMU Entrepreneurs of the Bay Area. We have a mailing list, so to stay up to date with future and upcoming events, please subscribe to that. And we'll have new initiatives starting next year, including different events that are smaller and more dinner focused, as well as building a Slack community to increase engagement across the community. Huge thanks to the Alumni Association, the Computer Science School, as well as DocuSign for hosting us tonight. We have a ton of food left, I believe. Feel free to grab a beer and we'll be around until 9 p.m.
Thank you for the invitation.